Story 1. I saw this today, and I honestly cannot stop laughing. I was traveling on the city metro. It was not overly crowded at that time, but all the seats were taken. Still, you could stand comfortably without being pressed up against a stranger. There was this kid sitting in the reserved seats. These are the ones specifically for people with physical disabilities, pregnant women, and elderly individuals. They are definitely not for parents with small children who are perfectly capable of standing. The boy was probably around 14 or 15 years old, and he turned out to be the hero of this story. At one stop, an entitled mother entered. She had a sweet little child who was trying hard to keep up with her mother's quick pace. The entitled mother immediately noticed the boy sitting in the reserved seat and locked eyes on him. I suppose this was her attempt to make people automatically offer their seats without her asking. The boy, however, did not move. This clearly irritated her, because she began moving toward him with heavy, deliberate steps. She came right up to him, stopped, and gave him another long stare. Still, the boy did not react or budge an inch. Then she suddenly began shouting. If she had not already caught the attention of the entire compartment, she definitely had it now. She started scolding the boy loudly for sitting in a reserved seat and not giving it up for someone she believed was more deserving, like herself as a mother with a young child. Her reasoning did not make much sense because the seats are not reserved for parents with small children, but she continued to raise her voice. She went on, yelling at the boy, and even tried to involve other passengers by asking for their opinions. For a short while, a few people seemed to side with her, probably because she was being so loud and dramatic. Then, completely unexpectedly, the boy rolled up the right side of his jeans. He calmly detached his artificial leg and placed it right in front of the entitled mother. The look on her face was absolutely priceless. She seemed shocked, embarrassed, and at a complete loss for words all at once. Without saying anything else, she quietly backed away. When the train reached the next stop, she stepped off immediately. I do not think that was even her intended stop, but she clearly wanted to escape the situation as quickly as possible. Story 2. This happened roughly 2 years ago, and it is actually my brother's story since he is my grandmother's personal care assistant. I waited a while to write this story out of respect for both my grandmother and my brother, who had to endure this treatment. My grandmother had a medical scare around 1 in the morning, and our parents immediately called an ambulance to take her to urgent care. Unfortunately, all the rooms were already full, and the doctors only allowed one person to stay with the patient. My brother Carito stayed with her since, as I mentioned earlier, he is her personal care assistant. From what I was told, they, along with a few other patients, had their beds lined up in the hallway. My brother remained seated next to our grandmother the entire time. He tried his best to rest, but with doctors constantly walking by and the hallway being cold, it was hard for him to sleep. Even though a nurse had kindly given him a blanket, the environment wasn't very comfortable. He began drifting off to sleep a little before he was suddenly jolted awake by 2 people walking past. These 2 women are what I'll call the Karens of this story. They walked slowly, looking at all the people lying in their beds from head to toe, before scoffing with clear disgust. Then, in a very rude tone, one of them said, "Ugh, they're letting homeless people into the hospital now. They should just make them sleep on the streets instead of letting them take up all the space in here." The second woman quickly added, "Yeah, if it were up to me, I'd lock them out of the building and only let in those who truly need medical aid. Not some drifter who's just trying to find a place to sleep for the night." To clarify, all the people lying in the hallway were actual patients wearing hospital gowns and waiting for rooms to open, not random homeless individuals sneaking in. While I have heard of situations where homeless people have attempted to find shelter in hospitals, I have personally never witnessed it. My brother didn't want to wake up our grandmother, so he just stared at the 2 women silently, giving them a look that basically said, "What on earth is wrong with you ladies?" He likely chose not to confront them directly because he also didn't want to disturb the other sleeping patients. If it had been me in my brother's place, I probably would have spoken up. Growing up, I dealt with constant bullying from both our parents and classmates all the way from elementary school through high school, so I often found myself standing my ground in situations like that. I likely would have said something along the lines of, "Excuse me, but people with lower incomes need medical assistance too," or, "Not everyone who comes into the hospital is homeless." It's also worth mentioning that most of the patients resting in the hallway were people of color, while the two women were not. They seemed to think it was perfectly acceptable to make openly prejudiced remarks because the patients were asleep and couldn't hear them. That added a whole other layer of nastiness to their behavior. I'm not sure exactly how much time passed before my grandmother was finally able to be wheeled into a room and placed under examination, but my brother recalled that after she was settled, he saw the same two women again. They were standing outside the room, peering in with a disgusted expression on their faces, as if to say, "How dare this woman receive any kind of help?" By that point, Garrido had run out of patience with them. Still annoyed by their earlier comments, he walked over and calmly shut the door right in their faces before returning to his seat next to our grandmother's bed. We're still not sure if those women were there visiting someone they knew, but my brother was certain they weren't nurses. They weren't wearing hospital uniforms and seemed to just be wandering the halls, making rude and prejudiced comments toward vulnerable patients. The entire situation was both upsetting and frustrating, especially considering that everyone in those hallways was there because they genuinely needed medical attention. Story 3. A few years ago, I was working as a conductor for a local train company. As we were about to leave a station, a warning was issued that something was wrong with the train's signal transmitter. As per protocol, the passengers were asked to leave the train and move on to a replacement bus. Now, it was kind of late, around 7 or 8 p.m., and there were maybe about 20 people on board, so we didn't think much of it. About 10 minutes pass, and as I'm making my way to the back of the train to check a control panel, I notice a man still sitting in one of the seats in the last cart. I stop, a little confused, and I say, "Excuse me, sir, but perhaps you didn't hear before. The train is the man," not even looking up from his phone, tells me, "Yeah, I heard you." Me, now actually confused, pause for a bit, and then say, "Well, sir, you'll have to leave the train. I'm sure we'll be moving again soon." "Sir, that doesn't matter. No passengers are allowed to stay on the train." "Look, girlie," in a condescending as heck tone, I might add, "I'm not getting off this train just so you and your lazy friends up there," he points at the camera in the corner, "can have a break." As he spoke, he got up from his seat. This man was probably in his late 40s, easily 6'5" and 240 pounds, towering over my 5'4", 21 years old, skinny self. I knew he was trying to intimidate me to leave, but since the cameras were on, and he'd even pointed them out himself, I found it hard to believe he'd actually do something. So I pressed on. "Sir, I am asking you politely to step off this train." He huffed at me and sat back down, without answering. Sir?" "Nah," he just grunted at me. By this point, I'm getting frustrated and tired with this bigot. I muster my sternest look and voice and try one last time. "Sir, the train is not going to move, and you are not allowed to be on it." I said, "I'm not freaking moving. Are you really this dumb? Just shut up and don't tell me anything unless it's that we're at the next station." "Well, all right." I paint on my cheesy smile and tell him with a sugary voice, "All right, sir, I will," and I hear him mutter under his breath as I leave. I tell my coworker what happened, and he freaks out at first, but as we are not allowed to forcibly remove passengers ourselves, and the nearest security guard is 45 minutes away, I tell him to leave the situation to me. He reluctantly agrees. 20 minutes pass and the signal transmitter error is solved. We get permission to move and are told to go back to our starting station to wait for our next scheduled trip. This, of course, meaning we're turning around and not continuing our planned route. It doesn't take long from when we leave the station that there's a knock on my door. I know it's the man, but as he can't see into my cabin, I don't answer the door. A few more knocks, and then he leaves. The trip back to our starting station takes about 45 minutes, and I call ahead to have a security guard waiting there for us. As we approach the station, I find the man pacing in the hallways, and I can tell he is absolutely furious. I'm trying so hard not to laugh out loud at his tomato-red face. "Sir, we are nearing the next station." Him, trembling over his word in anger. "This is not my freaking station." I look him dead in the eye with a fake, very overly done, confused face as the train pulls up to the platform, and I can see the guard through the window. "Well, no, sir, you told me not to talk to you unless it was to tell you when we were at the next station. This is the next station. We are here, so I'm telling you." The man was visibly shaking at this point. He was spitting out words that I couldn't apprehend. When the security guard tapped him on the shoulder and asked him to step off, he exploded in a fit of rage, which ultimately ended with the police escorting him off the premises. I reckon it took him a very hefty amount of unnecessary cash and time to get to his destination after that, while I was left with a very amusing story to tell my coworkers until I quit like 2 weeks later. Story 4. This happened a week ago, and I am still upset that people can be this bothersome. First of all, I am a 21-year-old guy. I had a big chunk of free time in my schedule, and since the feeling of senioritis had already started to kick in, I wanted to relax. It was a hot day, so I decided to get some sweet iced coffee. I sat down at a booth and started to play some Roblox. Judge me all you want, but I have been playing Roblox since 2016, and I have enjoyed the game ever since. I just wish I could say I like what the company is doing with it now, but I really don't. Anyway, I was playing this very addicting game called My Hello Kitty Cafe. It is basically a restaurant tycoon game, and I first got into it because of some friends a while back. While I was playing, I noticed a little girl and her entitled mother waiting in line. The girl was ordering a cake pop, but she kept peeking at my laptop every now and then before eventually walking over. This is how the conversation went. "Girl, hi, what game is that?" Me being friendly, "Oh, this? It is a game on Roblox where you build a restaurant, hire staff, decorate, and earn cash." "Girl, can I try?" I let her try, and we did an order together. At that moment, her entitled mother walked over to us with her coffee and cake pop. The conversation continued. Entitled mother, "What are you doing?" Me, "I am showing her a game on Roblox." Entitled mother, "You cannot play that game." Me, "Why not?" Entitled mother, "Roblox is a kid's game. Why are you playing a kid's game?" Me dumbfounded, because I grew up with this game as a teenager. Entitled mother, "Well, don't you see what is happening on the news? I would not be surprised if you were some sort of predator playing a game that is meant only for kids. You have other games that you can play, but you only chose to play Roblox. That seems really suspicious, doesn't it?" She said this with a passive-aggressive smile on her face. Me, "You are out of your mind for thinking like that." Turning to the girl. Me, "Can I have my laptop back?" Entitled mother, "Do not talk to my daughter, you creep." Then, without warning, the entitled mother threw her hot coffee onto my shirt. She grabbed her daughter and ran out of the coffee shop. The head barista quickly came up to me with napkins, asking if I was all right and if I needed to call the police. I told her I was fine, and she reassured me by saying that the entitled mother was banned from the coffee shop. All I am going to say is that some mothers can be incredibly infuriating. Story 5. This happened 2 decades ago. Some background: my first job was at a fast food chain. I worked hard, impressed the store manager, and got myself promoted. At the time, I was still 17, so I was promoted to team leader, with the implication that I would get promoted further when I was older. I was still in high school, so I worked the evening shift, which started at 4 and ended at 12. The evening manager was a good guy who also worked hard, and as a result had gotten promoted to a store manager position at a different location. Since they needed a manager, and I wasn't old enough, they hired a new manager who I'll call Karen. So Karen is hired and starts shadowing the current night manager, learning the ropes. After 2 weeks, he departs, and she is now set to take over. That's where this story really starts. I normally get in around 30 minutes early. One of my responsibilities is to make a position chart, which tells the workers where they are working that night. I need to hand it off to the manager for approval before posting it. As I arrive, I notice one of our night shift workers is already there. We'll call her Jen. She is sitting in the lobby crying and being consoled by other employees. I always found her to be a bit manic, but she was a nice girl. She had a rough home life, so I didn't hold it against her. Come to find out, she had just had a large fight with her mother, which ended with her getting kicked out. So, she is effectively homeless. Good reason to be upset. I ask her if she needs the night off. She says no, she needs the money. I can't disagree and head off to get started. For the night shift, the night manager typically runs the drive-through register after day shift leaves. There are a few reasons for this. First, this means that the manager has control of the drawer and money for the entire night. This eliminates the possibility of employees having short drawers. Second, this also puts the manager as the person interacting with the customers. I lived in a college town, so drunk guys drive through all the time and just want to chat up the pretty face behind the register. Third, it gives the manager the least amount of responsibilities as far as cleaning up. So, given what I now know, I make up a position chart and place Karen on the register and Jen on a fryer where she can get help if she can't focus. I walked to the office to hand off the chart to the night manager and was surprised that he wasn't there. He normally is at least an hour before the shift to make sure everything is ready. That's when I remembered, this will be Karen's first night alone. I groan inwardly. This is going to be a trial by fire kind of night. The day manager is there, but no sign of Karen. It's now 10 minutes to the shift, and even the day manager is wondering what's up. I fill in the day manager about Jen, show her the chart and ask if it looks good. She agrees, and I said I'll post it for now and Karen can sign it when she gets in. I had just finished posting the position chart when Karen showed up looking frazzled. She heads for the office without a word to anyone. Meanwhile, people start getting into position and ready for the shift. A few minutes later, Karen walks up, pulls my position chart and replaces it with a new one. Again, she walks off without a word. According to the new position chart, Jen is working the drive-through and Karen is working nothing. Her name isn't there. She has another employee working 2 positions and the whole shift working effectively 1 person short. What the heck? I head to the office where Karen and the day manager are talking and ask for some clarification. I explain there must be a mistake. No, that's right, Karen says. But you're not in a position and a worker is working 2 positions. Well, how am I supposed to be in charge if I'm in a position? Day shift manager, and I just stare at her blankly. You need to be in position. You are accounted for in the labor calculations. The day shift manager tells her. Well, I have 6 years of management experience, and I have never needed to fill a position to get the job done. Things are going to change around here. We do things my way now. Now, she just spent the last 2 weeks shadowing a manager that walked her through every step of the job. She knows she should be in position and why. This shouldn't even be a question. She just wants to spend the shift sitting in the office and everyone knows it. At this point, the day shift manager and I are sharing horrified glances at each other. I tell Karen that she'll need to go get people moved around if that's what she wants, because it's her plan. She gives an exasperated sigh and heads that way. I turn to the day shift manager and plead with her to call the store manager and let her know what's going on. She agrees. I head back to the line and start working. After a short time, the day shift manager pulls me aside and says that the store manager said it is Karen's shift. She is in charge. She makes the decisions. The day shift manager leaves after telling me that. The shift proceeds to implode in a spectacular fashion. Less than an hour in, the employee working 2 positions is so far in the weeds that orders are taking 3 times as long to get out. The drive-through is backed up, and the guys stuck at the window waiting are trying to flirt with Jen, who is having none of it and getting more annoyed by the minute. As the wait gets longer and longer, the people are becoming more and more irritated as they get to the window, and they are taking it out on Jen. Things are starting to get out of hand and Karen is nowhere to be seen. I go to the office to let her know we need help and find her watching a portable TV. I start to tell her what's going on and she cuts me off. She tells me to get back on the line, do my job and stop bothering her. I was about to try and explain when I just thought, you know what, screw that. Cue malicious compliance. I turned, walked back to the line and watched the situation unfold. 30 minutes later, a car at the window is giving Jen an earful about how long she has been waiting. She calls her worthless and Jen goes off. She takes the large strawberry milkshake next to her, chucks it at the lady and calls her an ugly witch. The lady and the inside of her car are covered in pink goo. Everything went so silent you could hear a pin drop. Then the lady starts screaming. Jen closes the window on her and walks calmly to the back. The lady peels around the front and comes in the front door screaming for a manager. I go and knock on the office door. Karen appears looking pissed and annoyed. She tries to snap at me, but I tell her she has a customer at the front asking for the manager. Karen rolls her eyes and heads towards the front, oblivious to the storm that is waiting. I went and found Jen huddled in the back crying again. I tell her to get herself together and head back to the front when she is ready. I head to the line where the now purple-faced lady is screaming at Karen about dry cleaning and upholstery cleaning and, I want that girl fired. At this point, I can see that Karen has finally realized that things have gotten way out of control. She is trying to calm the lady down, but she is having none of it. Eventually, Jen comes back to the line and the lady starts in on her again, calling her all kinds of nasty things. Karen just stood there and let the woman berate her. Jen just kinda deflated in front of us. Watching her crumble like that just broke something in me. I walked over to Jen and said, "Just quit. You're better than this job, and you can do better." She looked up at me for a moment, then smiled. She lifted her chin, walked to Karen and said, "I quit." She then handed her name tag to her and walked out. Karen started apologizing to the lady, who now seemed slightly mollified. Then, Karen started bad-mouthing Jen to her, saying how she was a terrible employee and how we were all happy she was gone. That's when I decided I was better than that job, too. I looked at Karen and said, "The only terrible employee here is you." And I walked out. 2 other employees walked out right behind me. We all met with Jen in the parking lot and went to a place where we sat and speculated on how Karen was getting along. Jen told me that was the first time in her life anyone had ever stood up for her. The next day, I got a call from the store manager asking for an explanation. Apparently, Karen had struggled the entire night with service. Afterwards, she had been there most of the night trying to clean and prep for day shift and had done a piss-poor job. The story she had given the store manager was that Jen and I had planned everything with the intent to set her up because we didn't like her and wanted to see her fail. Karen had basically blamed the whole incident on Jen and I. The store manager told me she was investigating to get all sides of the story, so I told her ours. A few hours later, she called again and informed me that Karen got fired and then asked if I would be coming in that night. I asked if Jen was getting her job back. She said no. The whole shake debacle wasn't something she could overlook. I said then my answer is no. She was surprised. She tried to negotiate with me. I told her my price was Jen getting her job back. She said she couldn't do that. And that was that. If you're wondering how Jen turned out, I married her. We are very happy and have 4 children. Story 6. I am 38 years old, and I have been married to Mike, who is 35, for 3 years. We have been together for 12 years. Both of us are very quiet, nerdy, and nature-loving people who are not into flashy displays or unnecessary drama. It was during the tail end of the pandemic, and since the borders were partially open, we decided to take a road trip to Gibraltar and elope. The global situation gave us the perfect excuse not to invite anyone to our wedding and to simply do what we truly wanted. When we told our close friends, Dewey, who is a 45-year-old woman, and Anne, who is a 60-year-old woman, about our plan, they immediately decided that we should have a double wedding. Right on the spot, They began taking over and suggesting a number of flashy and expensive things we had no interest in. This is the story of how they attempted to ruin our wedding and only ended up ruining their own. Our original plan was to get a rental car together and split the cost 4 ways, with Mike and Dee taking turns driving. However, a month before the wedding, Dee and Ann decided it would be cheaper to take the train 6 different trains across 3 countries. I immediately refused that idea, and soon after, we discovered that Dee did not even have a driver's license and had been driving illegally for years. Mike then offered to handle all of the driving himself if they still agreed to split the rental car with us. They declined, saying it was too expensive, and went ahead with their train plan. As expected, their travel went terribly. Trains were canceled, tickets were lost, and they ended up missing an entire night in Gibraltar because they were stranded at a small station in the Spanish countryside. Meanwhile, Mike and I enjoyed a wonderful road trip and spent a magical night in a beautiful rental apartment in Cartagena on the way. Ironically, their train tickets ended up costing more than half the price of the rental car. We had also initially agreed to get a really nice rental place in Gibraltar, complete with a hot tub and other luxuries. Split 4 ways, we could have afforded something truly special. But Anne suddenly decided she wanted a real hotel and pulled out of the shared plan. Mike and I found a gorgeous little 1-bedroom apartment with a hot tub and a breathtaking view of the sea. Dee and Anne, on the other hand, forgot to book a proper hotel and ended up in a run-down place by the port. It was the kind of spot merchant sailors use to crash when they are in town. Their room was located on a busy roundabout, right across from a fast food restaurant. There was no bath, no balcony, and the whole place was extremely basic. To make matters worse, it was actually more expensive than our lovely apartment. They got almost no sleep because of the drunk sailors and heavy traffic noise outside, and they did not even get towels provided with their room. The night before the wedding, we all met up for dinner. Dee and Anne had barely been in Gibraltar for 2 hours, while Mike and I had already been relaxing there since the day before. Dinner was tense, but Dee made an effort to be pleasant. At one point, she signaled the restaurant host, who brought over an elaborate champagne presentation with a bucket of ice. Dee popped the cork, handed it to Anne, and said, "Just like the one I gave you in New York, baby." It was clearly meant to be a romantic gesture. Anne, however, refused to take the cork, and the rest of us smiled nervously, trying to smooth things over. The host poured 2 glasses and handed them to Dee and Anne. Anne took 1 sip, spat it out, and loudly announced, "It's corked." We all tried the champagne and told her it tasted wonderful. Mike and I are not heavy drinkers, but we certainly know what champagne should taste like, and it was perfectly fine. Anne kept insisting it was ruined and loudly declared that they would not be paying for it. The host became visibly upset, and we soon understood why she told us the bottle cost £750. She even threatened to call the police. In the end, Dee had to pay for it, while Anne sulked for the rest of the evening. I felt completely embarrassed, and it spoiled the night for us. Later, when Mike and I returned to our apartment, we took a bubble bath, ate Jaffa cakes, and talked about how there was no way we were going to allow them to ruin another minute of our trip. If they wanted to ruin their own, that was their problem, not ours. The actual weddings went fairly smoothly, aside from the fact that Dee and Anne were still intoxicated from the night before. The registry office itself was beautiful, and I had the joy of marrying the man of my dreams. Afterward, we treated them to brunch to help ease their hangovers, and then patiently walked them through the park, taking lovely photos of them. Unfortunately, Dee managed to keep her finger over the lens in every single photo she took of us. When we finished, they suggested we all head to the pub and get heavily drunk, which was not something Mike and I were interested in doing. Instead, we dropped them off at the pub and went our separate ways. I was honest with them, saying, "I want to be alone with my husband," and they really couldn't argue with that. Now, the wedding dinner was another story. Mike, Dee, and I all had fairly casual preferences for where to celebrate. But Anne was insistent on a fine dining seafood restaurant that did not even serve dessert. I refused outright, as I do not eat fish at all. When Anne continued to push, We simply decided not to meet up with them for dinner. Anne also tried to convince us to contribute £200 toward a custom wedding cake that would be delivered to the restaurant. We politely but firmly said no. Instead, Mike and I went to the best steakhouse in Gibraltar, where I enjoyed a 1.2-kilogram steak followed by an incredible cheesecake for dessert. The evening was delightful, and the staff went out of their way to make it extra special for us. At around 8 o'clock in the evening, we received a message from them that said, "Where are you?" We chose to ignore it. Later, we discovered that Anne had forgotten to make a reservation at the seafood restaurant, which was completely booked. They could not leave for another place because they were waiting for the custom cake to be delivered. Eventually, they had to take the cake back to their hotel. Back in their room, which lacked even basic amenities like cutlery and plates, they ended up eating the cake using their credit cards. They spent the rest of the night drinking cheap supermarket alcohol in their hotel room. Meanwhile, Mike and I had a perfect evening. We took a taxi home, relaxed on our balcony under the stars, and shared hours of peaceful conversation and affection. The following day, Mike and I set off for a full day of hiking in the national park, which is a United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization World Heritage Site. It was one of the best days of my life. At one point, Mike was robbed and lightly bitten by a monkey, which, despite the inconvenience, we both found hilariously memorable. We enjoyed a full English breakfast at the Sky restaurant, explored St. Michael's Cave, and created unforgettable memories together. Meanwhile, Dee and Anne fought with each other, decided that Gibraltar itself was the problem, and spontaneously left. They booked a stay at a beach resort further up the Spanish coast and headed on foot to the train station. Predictably, the train system was chaotic, and they ended up stranded with all their luggage. It took them 14 hours to reach the resort, where they arrived at 11 at night only to check out the following morning. Mike and I, in contrast, spent several more nights enjoying our honeymoon. On the road trip home, we stayed once again in the same charming little place in Cartagena, where the host even surprised us with a small celebration in honor of our marriage. It was absolutely magical. Dee and Anne, however, faced more misfortune. They became stranded again during their journey home, lost half of their luggage, and even caught the illness that had been spreading worldwide.